Prince Harry never saw it coming. Not the silence, not the cold shoulders, and definitely not the quiet unraveling of the illusion he once believed was untouchable. Because the most dangerous moment in a celebrity's life isn't when people attack you, it's when they stop caring. And that exact nightmare is now circling Harry and Meghan like a storm that refuses to pass. What makes it worse, what makes it almost suffocating, is that the cracks didn't appear loudly. They appeared in whispers, in absences, in things that didn't happen when they absolutely should have. And once you see it, once you connect the pieces, it becomes impossible to pretend this is just coincidence. Because what Angela Levin has started exposing doesn't just shake Harry's image, it threatens the entire story he spent years building. Silence. That terrifying, deafening silence that follows people when their relevance starts slipping through their fingers like sand. Harry and Meghan built their entire post-royal existence on visibility. They didn't just want attention, they needed it. Attention was oxygen. Attention was survival. Every interview, every carefully staged photo, every emotional confession was designed to keep them at the center of the world's gaze. But when their anniversary arrived and the world barely blinked, something inside that carefully constructed machine began to collapse. Because this wasn't just the royal family ignoring them, that part was expected. This was Hollywood. The same Hollywood that once opened its doors like they were royalty reborn. The same Hollywood that once whispered their names with excitement and promise. Now, those whispers were gone, replaced by nothing. And nothing is the loudest message of all. Harry felt it. Even if he didn't admit it publicly, even if he smiled and pretended everything was fine, the absence spoke louder than applause ever could. No coordinated magazine spreads. No emotional tributes from powerful friends. No validation. The people he thought would replace his old family simply disappeared. And that kind of disappearance doesn't happen overnight. It happens when faith is lost, when illusions wear thin, when people quietly decide that the story they were sold wasn't real enough to believe anymore. Because this was never just about love, this was business. Their relationship became a brand, carefully packaged and sold to the highest bidder. Every smile had a purpose. Every appearance had a price tag. And when your entire existence becomes a product, silence isn't just awkward, it's fatal. It signals to everyone watching that the market has shifted, that the demand isn't what it used to be. And deep inside those Montecito walls, Harry began to realize something terrifying. The attention he thought would last forever was slipping away, and he couldn't stop it. Indifference is brutal because it offers no closure. There's no dramatic betrayal to fight against, no public enemy to blame, just the slow, quiet realization that the world has moved on. The Netflix deals that once promised billions began to feel hollow. The Spotify partnership that was supposed to redefine Meghan's power evaporated into embarrassment. Executives who once leaned forward with excitement now leaned back with skepticism. Behind closed doors, conversations changed. Hope turned into doubt. Doubt turned into regret. And regret turned into a word that cut deeper than any public insult ever could. Grifters. A word that doesn't just question success, it questions authenticity. And authenticity was the foundation of everything they claimed to represent. That word didn't just damage their reputation, it poisoned it. Because in Hollywood, reputation is currency. And once it's devalued, rebuilding it becomes almost impossible. Harry left the monarchy believing he was escaping a cage. He believed he was walking toward freedom, toward control, toward a life where he would finally be the author of his own story. But what he found instead was something far more dangerous, a world that didn't need him the way he thought it did. Because fame without mystique becomes ordinary, and ordinary doesn't sell. Ordinary doesn't command billion-dollar deals. Ordinary fades. Recognition alone wasn't enough. People knew who Harry was, but knowing someone's name and caring about their story are two very different things. And slowly, painfully, the difference became impossible to ignore. The projects didn't resonate. The narratives didn't stick. The magic wasn't there. And when the magic disappears, so does the illusion of power. Behind the scenes, disappointment grew. Not dramatic, explosive disappointment. Quiet disappointment. The kind that closes doors without warning. The kind that ends careers without announcements. And Harry began to realize that the empire he thought he was building wasn't as solid as he believed. But the business failures were only the beginning. Because Angela Levin's revelations didn't stop at contracts and deals. They reached into something far more personal, far more unsettling. The births of Archie and Lilibet, moments that should have been celebrated with clarity and pride, became surrounded by questions, inconsistencies, and silence that refused to settle. In the royal family, births are more than private events. They are public confirmations. They are history unfolding in real time. But with Harry and Meghan, everything felt different. hidden, controlled, managed in ways that didn't align with tradition. There were no hospital steps, no shared moments with the world, just delayed announcements and carefully released images that raised more questions than answers. Royal watchers noticed, experts noticed, and once those questions started, they never stopped, because secrecy breeds suspicion. And suspicion, once born, refuses to die. Harry's reactions only made it worse. Whenever the topic surfaced, his demeanor shifted. The relaxed charm disappeared. The openness vanished. He became defensive, guarded, distant. It was the reaction of someone protecting something fragile, something he couldn't afford to let unravel. Angela Levin saw it. She understood what others were afraid to say. Because this wasn't just about children. It was about truth, about image, about control. And Harry, whether he realized it or not, was standing at the center of a storm that was growing stronger by the day. A storm fueled not by accusations, but by unanswered questions. Questions that refused to fade. Questions that threatened to expose everything he had sacrificed to protect. And the most terrifying part wasn't what people knew. It was what they were starting to suspect. Because the deeper Angela Levin looked, the more she realized this wasn't just about public image collapsing. It was about the foundations of Harry's entire new life trembling in ways he could no longer control. The illusion he had built wasn't cracking because of one single event. It was cracking because too many small things didn't align. Too many carefully staged moments didn't feel natural. Too many answers arrived late, incomplete, or wrapped in explanations that raised more questions than they resolved. And Harry, the man who once stood proudly inside the royal system, now found himself standing alone outside it, defending a version of reality that fewer and fewer people were willing to accept without hesitation. Because once doubt enters the room, it doesn't leave quietly. It lingers. It waits. It grows. What made Angela Levin's revelation so uncomfortable wasn't just the information itself, it was Harry's reaction to it. Because reactions reveal what words try to hide. Every time the topic of Archie or Lilibet surfaced, something inside him visibly shifted. His posture stiffened. His voice lost its ease. His carefully practiced calm cracked just enough for people to see the tension underneath. And tension doesn't appear without reason. Tension appears when someone is carrying something heavy, something fragile, something they cannot afford to let slip. The same man who had openly described deeply personal stories in his memoir, who had exposed private family conflicts to the entire world without hesitation, suddenly became guarded when it came to this one specific subject. That contradiction alone was enough to make people pause, because openness had always been his weapon. Transparency had always been his shield. But now, suddenly, transparency was gone. And then there was Meghan, always poised, always controlled, always perfectly positioned just far enough away from the chaos to avoid being pulled directly into it. She never appeared rattled. She never appeared defensive. Her public image remained intact, untouched by the storm building around them. And that contrast became impossible to ignore, because while Harry absorbed the pressure publicly, Meghan remained carefully insulated from it. It wasn't accidental. It was strategic, because perception is everything, and Meghan understood that better than anyone. She understood that control over perception meant control over reality itself, and Harry, whether willingly or not, had become the face absorbing the consequences of that strategy. Angela Levin began connecting patterns that others hadn't dared to articulate openly. She noticed how every major revelation about their children was tightly managed, carefully timed, released in ways that maximized emotional impact while minimizing scrutiny. Nothing appeared spontaneous, nothing appeared unfiltered. It was presentation, not participation, and that difference mattered, because authenticity cannot be manufactured. It either exists or it doesn't. And when people sense the absence of authenticity, even subconsciously, trust begins to erode. The christening of Lilibet became one of the most revealing moments of all, because christenings in royal tradition are not casual affairs. They are historic rituals designed to publicly anchor a child within the royal lineage. They are witnessed, documented, preserved. But what happened instead felt disconnected from that legacy. A private ceremony, carefully controlled access, limited visibility. The public was told it happened, but they weren't allowed to truly see it. And in an era where visibility defines credibility, that absence carried weight. It left space for speculation, and speculation filled the vacuum instantly. Harry insisted he wanted privacy for his children. He insisted he was protecting them from the same invasive scrutiny that had haunted his own childhood. But that explanation began to feel incomplete when placed beside his willingness to expose every other aspect of his life for public consumption. Because privacy wasn't applied equally. It was selective, strategic, and people noticed that inconsistency immediately, because true privacy is absolute. It doesn't bend for convenience. convenience. It doesn't appear only when beneficial. Angela Levin understood that this wasn't just about protecting children. It was about protecting a narrative that had become central to Harry and Meghan's survival outside the royal system, because their value, their influence, their entire brand depended on maintaining the perception that their story was extraordinary, that their children represented not just family, but legacy. And legacy requires belief. Without belief, legacy collapses into ordinary existence. And ordinary existence was never part of their plan. What made Harry's position even more painful was the isolation he had created for himself. He had severed connections with the only institution that could have reinforced his credibility automatically. He had walked away from the structure that had protected him his entire life. And once that structure was gone, he was left exposed in ways he had never experienced before. In Hollywood, credibility isn't inherited, it's earned. And it can disappear overnight. The people who once surrounded him began keeping their distance. Conversations became shorter. Invitations became rarer. Opportunities became conditional. Because doubt is contagious. Once it attaches itself to someone, it spreads quietly through every room they enter. Harry could feel it. Even when nobody said it aloud, he could feel the shift in energy, the hesitation, the uncertainty, the subtle loss of confidence in him. Angela Levin didn't need to accuse him of anything directly. She didn't need to make definitive claims, because the power of her revelations wasn't in accusation, it was in exposure. Exposure of inconsistencies, exposure of contradictions, exposure of behaviors that didn't align with the image Harry had worked so hard to project. And once those inconsistencies were visible, they couldn't be erased. Harry had spent years believing he could control his story, that he could rewrite his role, that he could escape the expectations of his past and build something entirely new. But what he didn't anticipate was how fragile that new reality would be, because the further he moved from the royal family, the more he lost the automatic legitimacy that came with it. Outside the monarchy, he wasn't protected by tradition. He wasn't shielded by protocol. He was just another public figure fighting to maintain relevance in a world that constantly replaces yesterday's headlines with today's distractions. And now, for the first time since he walked away, Harry was confronting a truth he could no longer avoid. The story he had built wasn't as stable as he believed. The support he had relied on wasn't as permanent as he imagined. And the questions Angela Levin had helped bring into the open weren't going away. They were multiplying, growing louder, demanding answers he couldn't easily provide. Because in the end, the most dangerous threat to any carefully constructed image isn't scandal, it's uncertainty. Scandal creates headlines. Uncertainty creates doubt. And doubt destroys belief. Without belief, the narrative collapses. Without narrative, influence disappears. And without influence, the entire foundation of Harry's new identity begins to crumble piece by piece. And somewhere deep inside, Harry knows it. He knows that the silence, the distance, the questions, they aren't temporary. They are symptoms of something much larger, something irreversible, something that no interview, no memoir, no carefully managed appearance can fully repair. Because once people begin questioning the authenticity of your story, every detail becomes suspect. Every moment becomes examined. Every silence becomes louder than any explanation. And now, standing at the center of a narrative he can no longer fully control, Harry faces the one thing he spent his entire life trying to escape. Not the monarchy, not the media, but the terrifying possibility that the truth, whatever it may be, is slowly catching up to him.